During our divorce, my husband insisted on taking everything. He left me with only our twin kids. I didn't argue. I signed the papers without a fight. Those were the words whispered across the courtroom before the judge even entered. And by then, everyone had already decided I was either broken or foolish. My ex-husband sat 3 chairs away in a perfectly tailored suit, his expensive watch catching the morning light every time he adjusted his cuff. He smiled at people the way winners do. Small, practiced, certain. Every folder on his table represented another piece of the life we'd built together. The house, the business, the savings, the vacation cabin, even the vintage car we'd restored. One summer while the twins slept in their cribs, across from me sat 2 children swinging their feet beneath the wooden bench, too young to understand why their father never looked in their direction. The room smelled faintly of polished oak and stale coffee. Papers rustled. Pens clicked. My lawyer leaned toward me one last time, his voice barely above a breath. "You can still contest this." I shook my head. No. His expression tightened with disbelief. "He's taking almost everything." "I know. And you're keeping only full custody?" "Yes." He stared at me as though I had surrendered my future. Maybe that was what everyone believed. The clerk called our names. My husband stood first, shoulders back, confidence radiating from him like heat. When he glanced at me, the corner of his mouth lifted into a smirk I hadn't seen since the day he learned how easily people mistook charm for character. That smile told me exactly what he believed. He thought I had finally accepted defeat. He thought exhaustion had broken me. He thought silence meant weakness. He couldn't hear my heartbeat over the shuffle of legal documents, but I could. It was slow, steady, certain, because while everyone in that courtroom was watching the man who appeared to be walking away with everything, no one noticed the only thing I refused to let him have. Our children reached for my hands without looking. Neither of them reached for his. People assumed my silence had always been part of my personality. The truth was, it had become a survival skill after 12 years of marriage to a man who needed every room to orbit around him. Evan loved introducing himself as the founder of our company, the provider, the visionary. He never mentioned that I had spent nights balancing invoices, negotiating contracts, or answering clients while rocking crying babies with my foot. My work disappeared the moment it was finished, and somehow that made it invisible. By the time our twins turned 8, I had grown accustomed to being thanked by strangers, more often than by my own husband. Teachers knew I never missed a parent meeting. Neighbors knew whose car was always in the school pickup line. Doctors knew I remembered every allergy, every prescription, every fever. Evan knew only that everything at home somehow solved itself before he noticed a problem. I let people underestimate me because correcting them required energy I preferred to spend elsewhere. Quiet people hear conversations others never notice. They remember details everyone else forgets. They learn that confidence often speaks loudly because it is afraid of silence. When Evan announced he wanted a divorce, he expected tears, bargaining, and public heartbreak. Instead, I asked one question. "What do you want?" He answered without hesitation. "Everything." The speed of his reply told me more than any confession ever could. He wasn't ending our marriage because he wanted freedom. He wanted victory. He wanted witnesses. He wanted to stand over the ruins of our life together and call it success. That was the moment I stopped, thinking like a wife trying to save a marriage, and started thinking like a mother, protecting her children. From then on, every word I spoke and every word I deliberately withheld had a purpose that no one, especially Evan, ever suspected. The weeks leading up to the final hearing became a quiet parade of small humiliations. Evan never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He preferred the kind of cruelty that looked polite from across the room. When we met to divide our belongings, he walked through the house with a clipboard, placing neat blue stickers on everything he intended to keep: the grand piano, the leather sofa, the paintings we'd bought on weekend trips, even the coffee machine I used every morning before the twins woke up. Each sticker landed with a soft tap of certainty, as though he were labeling items in a warehouse instead of pieces of our life. "You never cared much about these things anyway," he said without looking at me. I folded another box of the children's books and simply nodded. He mistook my silence for agreement. His friends did the same. At a dinner held before the divorce was finalized, one of them laughed into his wine glass and said, "At least this won't turn into one of those messy custody battles." Evan smiled. "She knows what she's good at." The table chuckled politely. No one noticed my hands resting calmly around a glass of water, or the brief glance I exchanged with the twins through the dining room window as they chased each other across the yard. Even my lawyer struggled to understand me. Every time another proposal arrived with Evan demanding more, he would slide the papers across his desk, remove his glasses, and wait. "You don't have to accept this." "I know. He keeps pushing because you keep giving." I signed another page. The scratch of my pen echoed through the quiet office. Outside, rain traced slow lines down the windows, blurring the city into soft gray shapes. My lawyer watched the ink dry with visible frustration, while I watched something else entirely. Every concession made Evan more confident. Every victory made him less careful. And the more certain he became that I was surrendering, the less he noticed what I had quietly stopped putting in front of him. Every glance he failed to question, every document he signed without reading twice, every assumption he made about me became another thread in a pattern only I could see. By the time he believed he had stripped me of everything that mattered, he had already overlooked the one thing that would matter most. The moment arrived 3 days before the judge signed the final decree. I was at the twins' school for their spring music recital, standing in the back of the auditorium where the lights were low and the applause came in gentle waves. Evan had promised the children he would be there. They kept glancing toward the doors between songs, their hopeful smiles fading a little more each time they remained closed. He never came. Halfway through the performance, my phone buzzed. A photograph. Evan stood on the deck of a yacht with 2 investors, champagne raised high beneath a cloudless sky. The caption read, "Big things ahead." No mention of the recital he had forgotten. No apology. No explanation. I locked the screen before the twins could see it. On the drive home, they talked excitedly about the songs they had sung, pretending not to notice the empty seat that had stayed empty all afternoon. Children learn disappointment quietly when it happens often enough. That night, after they were asleep, I opened the folder I had been carrying for months. Inside were copies of every schedule I had managed alone, every medical appointment, every school report, every canceled visit, every message where Evan postponed, delegated, or simply disappeared whenever parenting interrupted his ambitions. None of it had seemed dramatic on its own. Together, it told a complete story. For the first time since he asked for the divorce, I allowed myself to imagine the years ahead. Not the house I had lost, or the accounts now bearing only his name, but the lives our children would remember. They would not remember who kept the lake cabin. They would remember who showed up. I closed the folder with steady hands. In that quiet room, I finally understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Evan had spent months fighting for possessions. I had been preserving evidence. The difference between those two choices was invisible now. It would not stay invisible for long. I stopped thinking about revenge as punishment. Punishment is emotional. It depends on anger. What I wanted depended on patience. Years before Evan and I married, I had earned a degree in accounting, even after leaving my full-time career to help build our company and raise our children. Habits like documenting expenses, organizing records, and preserving correspondence had never left me. I didn't collect evidence because I expected a divorce. I collected it because numbers, dates, and paper trails had always made more sense to me than promises. After the recital, I spent every evening once the twins were asleep reviewing files that had quietly accumulated over the years. Bank statements, corporate meeting minutes, emails discussing business decisions, calendars showing who attended school conferences, doctor's appointments, and parent-teacher meetings. Everything was arranged by date, not emotion. I wasn't searching for a dramatic secret. I was searching for the truth. When I finally met my lawyer again, I carried a single organized binder instead of several loose folders. He flipped through the first section, then the second. His expression changed almost immediately. "You've had all of this? For years. And you never mentioned it. You never asked." He leaned back, silent for a long moment before closing the binder. "This doesn't change the property settlement," he said carefully. "But it changes how the court sees responsibility, credibility, and future obligations." That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't trying to reopen the fight over furniture, investments, or the house Evan had fought so hard to win. Those things could be replaced. Trust could not. Reputation could not. And once a judge began comparing confident claims with documented facts, confidence alone would no longer be enough. Evan had prepared to defeat the woman he believed argued with feelings. He never imagined he would be answering to the woman who quietly kept records of everything. The final review hearing lasted less than an hour. Evan arrived wearing the same effortless confidence he had carried through every stage of the divorce. He greeted people in the hallway by name, laughed with his attorney, and barely glanced in my direction. To him, this was a formality. The difficult part was already over. I placed my binder on the table without a word. When the judge began asking routine questions about custody and future parenting arrangements, Evan answered first. He described himself as a devoted father whose demanding schedule had occasionally created conflicts but never diminished his commitment to the twins. Then my lawyer asked permission to submit additional documentation relevant to parental responsibility. The room became very still. Page by page, the calendar entries matched the emails. The emails matched the school attendance records. The attendance records matched the medical appointments. Dates lined up with messages where Evan had promised to come, then canceled hours, or sometimes minutes beforehand. There were no dramatic accusations, no emotional speeches, only ordinary facts arranged in undeniable order. The judge turned several pages in silence. Evan's confidence faded almost imperceptibly. He stopped leaning back in his chair. His smile disappeared. For the first time since the divorce began, he interrupted his attorney with a whisper that carried farther than he intended. I didn't know she had all of this. Neither had anyone else. The courtroom stayed quiet, but the silence no longer belonged to him. When the hearing ended, the judge acknowledged that the documents painted a consistent picture of who had provided stability, who had carried the daily responsibilities, and whose testimony was supported by evidence rather than memory. Future custody terms and financial obligations would reflect that reality. Outside the courthouse, Evan walked past me without speaking. For months he had measured victory by everything he could carry away. I watched him leave with the house keys, the business, and every possession he had fought to keep. Then I looked down as my twins slipped their hands into mine. For the first time in a long while, I realized he hadn't walked away as the winner. He had simply walked away with the wrong things. The changes didn't happen overnight. Real consequences rarely do. They arrived quietly, one conversation and one decision at a time. People who had once congratulated Evan on coming out ahead began asking different questions. Business partners noticed he was suddenly unavailable on the weeks he was expected to spend with the twins. Friends who had heard only his version of the marriage slowly realized there had always been another story, one supported not by resentment, but by years of consistent actions. I never called anyone to defend myself. I didn't have to. The truth has a way of traveling on its own once it no longer has to compete with appearances. The twins noticed the difference too. There was no tension in our home anymore. They stopped checking the driveway every evening, wondering whether promises would be kept this time. They laughed more freely, slept more peacefully, and began talking about the future instead of waiting for someone to show up. That change mattered more than any legal victory ever could. As for me, I discovered that losing nearly everything had forced me to measure my worth differently. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love and silence with peace. They aren't the same. Peace isn't pretending everything is fine. It's no longer needing to prove your value to someone determined not to see it. Looking back, I understand why everyone thought I had made a terrible mistake. From the outside, it looked as though I had surrendered. But not every battle is won by holding on. Sometimes the strongest move is letting someone grab everything they think they want, while you quietly protect everything that truly matters. By the time they realize the difference, the victory they celebrated has already become the price of their own choices. And that is why this story isn't really about divorce. It is about knowing that your character, your children, and your peace are worth far more than anything another person can take from you. A year later, I drove past the old house without slowing down. The flowers along the front walk had been replaced. The shutters were a different color. Someone else's children had left. Bicycles on the lawn. For a moment, I searched for the ache I thought I was supposed to feel. It wasn't there. Home, I had learned, was never the building Evan fought so hard to keep. It was the sound of the twins laughing over breakfast. The comfort of reading bedtime stories, without waiting for disappointment. To walk through the door, and the quiet certainty that our lives no longer depended on someone else's approval. I found work again, first as a consultant, then as a financial manager for a growing company. The skills I had tucked away for years hadn't disappeared. They had simply been waiting for me to use them again. Each paycheck reminded me that independence isn't built in a single decision. It's built one ordinary day at a time. The twins grew taller, more confident, and wonderfully curious. They still saw their father, and I never stood in the way of that relationship. Children deserve the chance to know both parents. What they eventually understand, however, cannot be taught through speeches. It is revealed through consistency. They noticed who remembered birthdays without reminders, who stayed through fevers, who celebrated small victories, and who quietly kept every promise. As for Evan, I stopped measuring his life altogether. That was the final piece of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. Revenge had never been watching him lose. It was reaching the point where I no longer needed to. Sometimes people ask how I stayed so calm while he walked away with everything we owned. I smile because they are still asking the wrong question. He didn't leave me with nothing. He left me with the only two people who gave my future meaning. And in trying to take everything, he unknowingly handed me the chance to rebuild a life that no longer depended on him. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't proving he was wrong. It was waking up one morning and realizing his opinion no longer mattered.